Hi everyone, welcome to this first of a series of short videos on the basics of astrology. Now I'm creating this series sort of as a primer or an orientation for those who are coming to astrology, coming to me for a reading, maybe for the first time, your first reading, and you just don't have a familiarity with the language of astrology and the graphics and all that. And also for those who may be joining me in one of the experimental labs that I'm running. I'm doing currently a momentum lab. There's plans to revive the Damon lab, which is something I started a couple years ago that I'm reviving, which is a process of discovering your inner genius. Have plans to do a love lab and a prosperity lab, probably later in the year or into 2025. And these are a more immersive sort of a series of multi-week programs, sort of a course that I'm doing and leading and guiding small groups, small cohorts, 5 to 10 people at a time to really do a deep dive into your chart and find out, what is my daemon? What is my genius? How do I find love? How do I find prosperity? How do I build momentum in my life? So these will be primers for you. So if you're watching this video, you're coming to it, that's probably why I've sent you this link. But I'm also going to put this publicly on my channel because other of you out there may find it interesting or helpful or useful. So without further ado, we'll jump in and get a sense of the astrology basics. And a lot of this will be a consolidation of the work I did on a series called Blueprint of the Soul. For anyone who's been following the channel for a while, it's one of the first things I did back in 2020. And I'll provide links to this series because if you find this stuff helpful and you want to go a little deeper, there's a lot of great information in here. So there'll be a link to this series in the description below. But essentially in that series, I sort of took what I called an energy approach to astrology. I'm a big fan of this. I borrowed this from the astrologer Stephen Arroyo, who really sort of, consolidated into like the energy and the experience. So we use our energy, and that use of energy informs how we experience life. And there's sort of 5 basic principles to how we use our energy, right? We can say that there's elements, signs, houses, planets, and aspects. And in this little series of videos, I'm only going to focus on these 3. We're not going to really talk about the elements, although I will touch upon it when we do look at the signs. And I'm not going to talk about aspects. But again, this is all in the series if you want to look at it. But we're going to look at here, and we're going to go in a different order. I'm going to start with the planets. Then we're going to look at the signs. And then we're going to look at the houses. And these 3 pieces really get to the essential of what astrology is. And so what we have here are the planets, and what those are is they represent the functions of our experience. And then the houses represent fields of experience, and the signs represent qualities of experience. And if you can understand the relationship between these 3 pieces here, how planets in signs and in houses affect how our personality is built essentially, it's a long way into really understanding how astrology works. So that's what we're going to do in this series of videos. So we're going to start with the planets in this one. And as I said, these are the functions of experience, right? This is essentially, there's these 10 planets or symbols or archetypal functions that we all have. Everyone has these in their chart. We all are born with all of the planets. Now they're in different signs, they're in different houses, so they're going to have different characteristics. But they all function the same, okay? And so if we look at these functions, I'm going to start with the first group of 5 here. And the first we always look at are the sun and the moon. In astrology, we call these the luminaries, okay? The lights, right? And of course, these first 2 aren't planets at all, right? The sun is actually a star and the moon is a moon, right? But we call them planets in astrology because they are part of the wandering stars in the sky. Right? But they're the most prominent, right? They are much bigger by magnitude in the sky than any of the other stars or planets. So these 2 are the most significant, and they form the foundation of our chart in many ways. So when we're talking about our sun, we're talking about identity, our vitality, our spirit, our sense of purpose, our desire or will, and it's really focused on the future. Right? And we can see this in kind of contrast. You can think of the sun and moon as a binary pair in many ways, right? The moon is really about self-image, and I would say this is really about the ego. The ego is an image of ourself. It's our self-image that we create so that we can find security, because the moon is all about security needs. It's receptive and it's focused on the past, right? So where the sun is about identity, the moon is about security, right? So there's a sort of a polarity or a binary between these two symbols. And then next we would look at what we call the personal planets. And these are the 3 planets Mercury, Venus, and Mars, which orbit close to us and Earth, right? So Mercury is our planet of communication, conscious mind, the logical and the rational approach, right? And the way we think, the way we learn, the way we speak, the way we communicate is all going to be determined by Mercury in our chart. And we'll learn a lot about how we use that planet, right? Venus is all about values, attraction, love, affection, relation, right? Whereas Mars is action, desire, initiative, drive, and sexual urges. And again, we can think of Mars and Venus as another one of these sort of binary pairs, similar to the sun and the moon, because together they really describe our sexuality in many ways, right? Venus is what are we attracted to? What do we love, right? What are we pulling towards ourselves as an attraction field? And then Mars is about, well, how do we go about getting our desire? How do we initiate with others to express our desire, our sexual urges? So together, these two sort of describe our personality and our sexuality in many ways. Now, we could create simple, archetypal keywords for each of these planets. For instance, we could say the sun is the king of our chart and the moon is the queen, where Mercury would be the communicator and Venus would be the lover and Mars would be the warrior. Now, we could create many. We could do dozens of different archetypal qualities of each of these planetary symbols, right? It's not just the warrior or the kind of warrior, right? Are you a spiritual warrior, right? Are you a social justice warrior, right? Are you there's a lot of warriors, there's a lot of kinds of lovers, there's kinds of communicators, there's kinds of rulers, right? So, but this is just to give you a sense, to sort of simplify how we might think about these planets as these different functions, right? They're all functions of the self. Now, next we'll go to the second sort of 5 planets, and now we start with what we call the social planets, which is Jupiter and Saturn. And here, another kind of binary pair with these two planetary symbols, right? And these are planets that we tend to use more socially, where the Venus and Mars and Mercury are more personal. These become sort of social functions that we use. Jupiter, expansion, grace, good fortune, faith, and trust. In contrast to Saturn, contraction, effort, limits, structure, and achievement, right? Jupiter expands, Saturn contracts. Jupiter wants to be graceful and easy, almost effortless, right? Saturn says, no, you have to put in the effort. It's hard work. There are limits. There's challenges. If you want to achieve, you have to do the hard work. And Jupiter says, I'm just gonna be. I'm gonna have faith in myself and trust that the universe will take care of me. So 2 interesting archetypes that are functional in all of our charts. Then we get the transpersonal planets, and these kind of go beyond the self, right? These are almost, transpersonal forces that come into our lives, and for some of us, they're going to be more prominent in our chart, so we're going to feel them more. Others may not, right? But we all have these planets in our horoscopes, right? So Uranus, what's that about? Individual freedom, differentiation, genius, and change, and a very sudden change, right? Compare that to Neptune. This is transcendent freedom, compassion, and universal love, right? 2 different kinds of freedom, individual versus transcendent. And then you get to Pluto. Pluto's about transformation, transmutation, elimination, and rebirth, right? And these are, just like I said, transpersonal forces that sort of act forces beyond ourselves in many ways. And then they show up in the chart. They'll show us where these forces can be present and active. Again, we could create some simple archetypal nomenclature for each of these planets to help us sort of identify and sort of personify them in a way. That's what I love to do. I love to anthropomorphize them in many ways. I think it's helpful because all these labs and all of these series that we're going to do is really about helping us tell our own story. What is our myth? What is our story? And we all have these archetypes within us. We all have the wise teacher that is our Jupiter. We all have a strict authoritarian who is our Saturn, right? We have our chain breaker, Uranus, who is the Promethean, right? Who's going to, throw off the chains of limitations and be unbounded. We have the boundary dissolver, which is Neptune, right? Beyond boundaries. And then we have our power transformer, which is our Pluto. So this is a cool way of looking at the planets in terms of getting a sense of these as a collection of sort of parts of ourselves. The way we function, we use different planets in different situations, and they interact differently in our charts. We all have a different configuration of how these planets show up based on our horoscope, based on the exact time we were born and the position that these planets were in the sky at that time. So, anyone who knows me and has watched any of my videos knows I love these word clouds. I've built them for all of the planets and all of the signs. And we'll be using these. I'll use them in your reading. I will be using them in the labs that we'll be doing. Everyone will get their own playbook for the lab, and it'll be customized with specific word clouds for your chart, which is pretty cool. But I want to just familiarize you with how I use these and how they are structured. And essentially, all of these, we do have small descriptions of the sun, but each of these archetypes, the planets, the signs, they all have many, many aspects to them. They're sort of multifaceted archetypal symbols that can demonstrate and constellate many different qualities, right? So if we think of the sun, right, which is that individuality, that self-expression, it's creative, it has potential, right? It's our power, it's our vitality, right? But all of them also have shadow side expressions, right? This can be very childish in many ways. It can be boastful or vain. It can be overbearing. And so I always encourage people when we're looking at these symbols to really get a sense of, what is my sun about at its core? And you may identify based on the sign your sun is and with different aspects of this symbol. Then we would go through all of the different planets. Of course, the moon, which is about security and self-reflection. It's our feeling nature. I'm not going to go into too deeply into all of them, but I just want to give you the idea of how these things are constructed, right? Mercury, our communications director, information, thinking, right? Self-expression, learning, right? Venus, our sensuality, how we relate to others, balance, right? Values, harmony, all of these things associated with Venus. Mars, aggression, independence, right? Our action, orientation, our sexuality, our potency, our virility, lust, right? Jupiter, expansive, jovial, excessive at times, humorous, philosophical, growth-oriented, the biggest expression that we have. Contrast that with Saturn, which is all about structure and building boundaries and having patience and limits and discipline and hard work, right? But it could be depressive. It can cause pain and suffering. We could feel defeated where our Saturn is. So we have to work with these energies. Uranus is our liberator, right? Freedom from the known, right? The revolutionary genius in all of us. We all have a Uranus in our chart. This is one of our sources of genius, the sources of being a radical nonconformist, right? Neptune, our urge to merge, right? That cosmic oneness, the divine spirit within us all, right? Universal love. It's a mystical, psychic, visionary type of archetype and as a planet. So we all have Neptune somewhere in our chart. We all have this dreamy side of us that desires to merge into the oneness of all, right? Where it is in your chart, what sign it's in, that's going to tell us how our Neptune operates. And then, of course, Pluto, right? The lord of the underworld, right? This powerful, deep, volcanic, instinctual, evolutionary force. This is the unconscious desire of the soul that wants to be expressed. So there's the sort of archetypes of the planets. And in the next video, we will look at the signs as qualities of experience, right? So we just looked at the planets, right? They're the functions of experience. Then we'll look at all the 12 signs of the zodiac, and we'll see that they have a different quality. And when you put a planet in a sign, it functions with that quality, right? And I'll demonstrate that in the next video.